Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Telemedicine Talks. Love to have you around. As always, we have your lovely host, Phoebe Gutierrez, and me, Leo Damasco. Thank you for joining. We are always scouring the news for, new cases, new news, and we found one that was pretty interesting. And this is the story about Zealthy, or Zealthy, right? So this is a GLP-1 telehealth company that found themselves in hot water. If you Google the name right now, the headlines are, "Oh, the FTC, DOJ moves to seize Zealthy." And Phoebe, what do you know about this and what's going on with this?
Yeah, well, I love seeing different telemedicine companies in hot water. But I think that the most interesting thing about Zealthy is that the CEO is somebody who, at least in my world of the enforcement, we know pretty well. So the CEO and founder of Zealthy is the same former CEO, but founder of Cerebral, which also got into trouble for doing some fast and loose stuff in the telemedicine world. This time is
Yeah,
slightly different.
we've talked about Cerebral in the past multiple times too, because we've
Yeah.
used it as like our case study scenario where it's like, hey, heads up, people are getting legal sanctions, are getting sued for that. And Cerebral is one of those that was like a landmark case where, yeah, they were actually indicted for that, right? And fines, levies. Cerebral, funny enough, is still existing and is growing now under new leadership, right? But
Mhm.
then the original owner, the guy that you're talking about right now, went and founded Stealthy, right? The
Nope.
GLP-1 study.
Exactly, exactly. So, interestingly enough in business, take a little sidetrack here, but, when a physician messes up, you guys lose your license. So it's not like, "Look, I'm gonna go really hurt this patient or do something crazy." There's a formal investigation, you get your license revoked, like, you can't do it anymore. In business, that does not exist. So in telemedicine, to me, it's I don't wanna say comical, but, like, the quote from the DOJ, I think, sums it up, where it's at 2 consecutive telehealth companies that he founded and has led during the past 6 years, Cerebral and then Zealthy. The defendant has engaged in wide ranging law breaking that has harmed tens of thousands of telehealth patients. So that kind of sums it up.
They weren't
So,
mincing any words at there, no. They were
no,
just
my
like,
gosh,
yeah.
no, no. That's why I was like, in my world, like, this is juicy because, Cerebral was, let's say, overprescribing. That was the core complaint. They were overprescribing. They weren't verifying age and like location of patients. And one of their patients actually died and he was under the age of 18. So he never technically like had the ability to consent for Adderall, but was given a lot of Adderall. So that was kind of the issue that happened with Cerebral. Zelfie is a completely different set of rules that have been, like, broken. So Zelfie, the complaint reads basically that there were low costs being touted, and it was definitely a misrepresentation of the services that were being provided. So it was one of those, like, pay 0 today, give us your credit card number, cancel anytime. And then they just kept charging the patients, which was not necessarily harmful in the patient care side, but just, like, harmful in, like, are you a scam company? But then also, which is the big one that I think should scare a lot of doctors, is Zelthy was using doctors' licenses and doctors' names to write prescriptions, and the doctors had no awareness that this was happening.
That is the part that scares me. Well, first of all, how did this guy get away after Cerebral, right? And it turns out that you're right, there was no real judicial punishment, right? And the civil punishments were levied on Cerebral themselves and not necessarily on the owner, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, he was scot free and clear and then started this company. And this is one of the horror stories I've heard before with telemedicine doctors really just jumping on in telemedicine and things being done under their name, under their NPI, under the guise of their license without them knowing. Yeah, how did that happen? How was that set up?
Well, I think to me, this is why I joke. My dream job is not to be like on a ship cruising. Like, my dream job is that the federal government is going to start a regulatory agency that actually oversees telemedicine companies, and there are going to be checks and balances. Let me build that. I'll do it for free. at this point. There is no checks and balances. A telemedicine company does not need to get formal approval to technically do really anything. We have certain like checks and balances in the sense of like if you're using a compounding pharmacy or GLPs and you want to market, you have to get legit script certified. So there's certain things that you have to do, but there's nothing that actually is going to stop you from delivering care to patients or that you have to be approved before you can launch a medical practice or, partner with the medical practice in the telemedicine space. So to me, like that's the big problem is you have people breaking rules. Again, do I think that the CEO of Zealthy knew what, they were doing at the time? Absolutely. I don't think any of this was a mistake or accidental, but also I think that like the repercussions definitely didn't match like the action and he was able to continue operating as needed. And honestly, still to this day now, even after this was filed last week, can still go and start another telemedicine company and get it off the ground if he has enough money.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And on the clinician side, a little scary, right? This is where you need to do your due diligence and try to figure out exactly what the prescribing practices are, if there's anything hidden there. A lot of the times too, the nightmare stories revolve around these prescription or the renewals of the prescription, right? Is it being auto renewed? Are you signing off for multiple renewals down the line? Are you able to review each renewal, each prescription? And in brick and mortar cases too, right? When you prescribe something, you can prescribe multiple renewals at one time. Usually, what, like 9 months at a time, maybe even a year. But anytime you renew that script, there should be a new appointment or at least an evaluation, right? Are companies sending out questionnaires? Are they guising an evaluation? Are they telling the patients that, yeah, this is new evaluation without the doctors not really knowing it and sending that prescription as well? What if there's new information the doctors don't know, right? And what if that information really causes harm and the doctors don't know? It's going to be prescribed under your name. So that's a big concern.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's a couple different like elements that telemedicine companies inadvertently, I don't want to say like skirt or miss, but yeah, one of them is the like auto renewal. Like I know many people who signed up for a year supply of GLPs and then you have companies that are sending them monthly like how's it going? Let's
Yeah.
meet. The patients are being totally non-compliant with those rules, but like why would they? For like they have their
Right.
prescription already.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it is a little bit of absolutely, you can totally like say that you're operating in a quote unquote compliant. You can send the forms, but if you're not trying to do anything to actually enforce the compliance, then you're turning a blind eye, which again, I think is part of my issue with telemedicine is unless you go through insurance or a federal program, if you're solely doing something cash pay, it takes years to catch up to get in trouble. There's no sort of audit, there's no monthly check, there's no pre-approval process. There's even with like medical board like complaints, they don't target the company, they go after the doctor.
Yeah.
It doesn't fit. There really is nobody kind of like overseeing this. So like Zealthy, for example, like this stuff was happening in 2023, 2024. Like it's 2026. So they have been able to continue going. And sure, the complaint also says like most people are saying like this is going to bankrupt the company.
Yeah. Well,
And
you're right. The Zealthy company will dissolve, but then, yeah, gonna pop up. And that brings up a good case or a good point that you brought up as well, about who's on the line, right? Who's stuck with the bag if things go wrong. I've talked to multiple doctors that unfortunately are just repairing their practice, really repairing, their licenses and their credibility because they got stuck not knowing what they were doing, right? They were working for a company that was, not necessarily doing the most right things. The company dissolved. And you're right, the only people that they could go after then is the docs. The medical boards will go after the docs and they can't go after a company that no longer exists. The docs
Mhm.
lost their licenses, or it just snowballed from there, and if you have multiple licenses, those are gone too, right? And you
Yeah.
spend a lot of years, a lot of money with legal trying to repair that. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think again, this is where, and I don't know, Leo, maybe we can talk a little bit about like what we've been working on, but this is like the whole purpose of corporate practice of medicine people is to avoid a Zealthy and a cerebral. So as much as people complain and moan about the paperwork and the this and the that and the whatever, this is the exact reason why we need physicians in the driver's seat when it comes time to building compliant companies. Because if you let somebody control the clinical side of things that is not a clinician, they are going to build operations that inherently don't meet like the clinical threshold, that
Yeah.
are not necessarily like friendly or patient focused, and it ultimately just create the plate. Like, you wanna talk about fraud, waste, and abuse, like, hello, like, this is a very perfect example of that.
And I would argue not just any physician, right? The right person, right? The person that is educated in what to look for, the person that has the personality to stand up for what they believe in, has good kind of clinical and basically doctor-like morals, right? To say, hey, this is not necessarily what's best for the patient or what's clinically right. And gosh, a lot of times, I'm all for physicians taking administrative duties, being entrepreneurs, getting into that realm. You're going to have to find that balance, right? You're going to have to find that balance between business and clinical medicine. And sometimes they don't agree, right? As a doc, you're going to have the fortitude to say, hey, I know this is going to hurt business a little, but this is the right thing to do for medicine. And really, if you want to look at it, hey, this is the right thing to do to save my licenses because you're going to be scrutinized under a whole different set of rules, right? So,
No, you're regulated differently.
yeah.
Telemedicine is not regulated right now, and, like, physicians are and clinicians are. I think it's been really interesting because, again, as everybody talks a little bit about, like, where healthcare is at and digital health and telemedicine and access, and as much as it's amazing to see telemedicine companies popping up here, there, everywhere, like, I mean, nowadays it seems like there's a telemedicine company for everything. Let's map your biomarkers to your horoscope to your toe fungus. That's a new company, Leo. We should do that one. But to me, it all really kind of surrounds around this idea of, again, like, let's just go make as much money as we possibly can. And I think that's where some decisions are just being made in very poor light. And they're not including the physicians in some of these like really important and I would say like distinctive decisions that a physician should be answering. So if you are a PC owner and you don't meet with your company once a month and you don't understand like what their protocols do or how their EHR is configured, or you're able to just sit and click a box to order a prescription because something tells you. Those are all the things that you need to be poking holes in and going, this is done wrong or this is done this way to avoid certain things. Like Zealthy had us. Who is Zealthy's PC owner? Like, I want to know. That interests me because something obviously went awry in that relationship to be able to allow very obviously an MSO control all this, the clinical side of things, or I don't know, maybe there was no clinician. Like,
No, I wonder, you're right, what role the PC owner is and what's happening to them in the background, right? I'm looking at all these headlines and it's all directed towards the company. But it's not gonna be surprising that behind the scenes too, are the medical boards going after the PC owner of this company, right? Because Zealthy was prescribing nationally, right? And I'm assuming at least the setup had to be done according to CPOM, which required a PC owner, right? Yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see what kind of repercussions that person's gonna have.
yeah, I mean, probably none.
Huh.
Because again, it's a little bit more of like a contract compliance, requirement. Historically, like there hasn't been a ton of enforcement around like corporate practice of medicine, like non-compliant. Not yet, at the very least, like,
Cool.
perhaps maybe that's something to come, but at least in what I've seen, everything usually because that's like a business structure thing. It's a little bit more, again, they're all focused more on the like supervisory side, so very clinical. So it's always the
Yeah.
medical boards that are the first ones like raising their hand going, we're going to go after this person. I think done, cerebral, those were some kind of like very large, kind of like big cases in this. And even so, those, I think Dunn was one of the physician owner who did get in trouble and I think did face like jail time and fine, but he was also in on the fraud. So
Yeah.
I think it does layer in, the question of like, are you being technically a ghost PC owner or a ghost like supervisor? Should you be liable for the stuff that's happening underneath your purview? I would argue to say yes. Probably on your side, you're probably gonna have a difference of opinion.
Well, no, that's what you signed up for, right? You signed up for that responsibility. And I think being a ghost owner, not even making the minimal effort to understand what's going on, this is your license, right? This is what you're putting your name to, right? So, yeah, I think the responsible thing to do would be doing that and would to be where at least have some regular meeting, have some, regular interaction. I know some companies whose PC owners aren't even in country most of the times, right? They're somewhere. I don't know. Nobody knows who they are. They're not in regular meetings or whatnot. So, yeah,
Yeah, I get it. And the interesting thing is, like, when I am working on clients and I'm building these, very compliant PC MSO infrastructure, I can literally only take on like 4 clients at a time.
yeah,
So this idea that you have physicians that are like PC owners of like 10 companies, 15 companies, plus doing all this other stuff, I'm just like, how? Like, how? Because I know how difficult it is from the compliance side and technically, also I do is because a physician will contract with me to do that for them, or a company will contract with me to do that
yeah.
for them. If you're doing that, like working in a company that doesn't have a me or that infrastructure, like how are you doing this? And I think, Leah, that goes back to the conversation like you and I had privately, which is do people understand what they are agreeing to when they sign these contracts and how to actually operationalize that? In very few instances, I've worked with companies where they actually understand and you have somebody really, like, advocating to build out the best structure. And most of the time, especially when you're talking about the supervisory side or the prescribing side or what the rules are here or what the rules are there, like, it's really hard for physicians to actually understand and, like, comply with all those things. And so, again, it's like, if nobody's doing this stuff for you, like, how are you actually doing this, especially if you're doing it at all these different companies and making sure that they're not doing the stuff that they're not supposed to be doing?
Actually, that's a good point. As a single person, right, as a single practitioner, even if this is your solitary job, right? Yeah, how are you doing that alone? I would argue, yeah, you're gonna need some compliance person. You're gonna need somebody behind you keeping track of that for you, unless you're super organized.
I know one doctor, he'll be on the podcast. His wife does all the stuff for him, and it's pristine. I mean, he calls me when he has a question, of course, because we're besties, but yeah, you have to be organized. You have to have somebody who kind of understands like little bit of the nuances, but also you just need to work with like the right companies.
Yeah.
You just got to make sure that the companies are asking the right questions and want you involved. I think is the biggest thing. Like I always get pause when you're collecting a paycheck, but if you haven't talked to that person. Like on my side in consulting, I could not imagine taking money from somebody and like not doing anything month over month. Like to me, it seems weird, So again, as there's more and more companies like this, and it does appear to me, my hypothesis was right. A couple years ago, regulators are starting to understand telemedicine.
Yeah.
It took us some years, right? Like I got thrown into it, but it took us policymakers some years to really grasp our head around the layered of all of these rules and regulations. But now that we understand it and how it's supposed to be structured and how it's supposed to be done correctly, I just see so many companies doing it all wrong. And I have to assume that regulators are not going to be as forgiving in the past as they have been.
Well, and you see the trickle of things happening, right? California is a good example of that. There's a lot of more scrutiny about how these PCMSO structures are structured. I know Texas is getting a little bit more nuanced as well. They're requiring the PC owner to be at least the same kind of practitioner or doctor to the company that they're owning. A lot of times you see maybe like a family medicine doctor, and not picking on family medicine, just setting an example, but owning a strict psychiatry practice, things like that. And I know Texas is cracking down on that. Yeah, you're right. It is going to catch up. It is going to catch up. And it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And I think that they will probably make some examples out of some of the largest names. So again, all those companies that got named in some of the complaints earlier this year about like deceptive marketing and compounding the GLP, like I am going to assume that those are like on the front list of some of the different agencies in the state. And I could make a call and figure out if my hypothesis is right, but I kinda don't wanna know. But I would be very, very, very surprised if California did not go after some of the PC owners listed on a lot of those complaints, only because California enforces CPOM so hard. They are really, really, really aggressive when it comes to enforcement, as we know. And we're also a state that is absolutely happy to make people an example and like lead the way for other states. So I'm pretty like when I would do this, that was basically it. The DOJ would drop something, or we would kind of get like little leads. And then it would lead us to a paper trail where we would build our case behind the scenes for months. And then a big shabam would happen. So I am kind of interested to see how California Medical Board or even DMHC and some of the other regulatory agencies here are kind of going to think about tackling some of this.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah. Scary. Dun, dun, dun. We should have scary music.
Right. Right. Thinking, gosh, why are people listening to us when we're always just scaring them? But no, I think you need to know. Like, you need to be aware of what's going on around you and what you're actually practicing it.
Absolutely. And again, I think everybody frets over the contract. Everybody frets over, do I have a PC owner? Everybody frets over these same things. If you cannot build your operations to effectively support all the things that are listed in that contract, then you are destined to fail because it is so convoluted and it is so complicated and operationally hard to comply with that ultimately you have to have a system that makes it easy to work for you. And again, that's what you and I have been really kind of like focusing on over the past couple months is how do we actually do this compliantly? We've told a lot of people how to do it, right? Like I get to work at companies and with these really massive budgets and teams, but like on a small scale, how can you actually, as a physician, build a compliant CPOM infrastructure around PCs? And I mean, even between you and I, it's like we found certain things where it's like, well, damn, this is really hard, right?
Yeah. And just a lot of people will take the easy answer and not even understand how to get to that answer at all. So, yeah, very kind of difficult navigating through that.
Yeah, nope, totally. And I think for people who are out there that are either current PC owners and are just kind of curious, like, oh crap, maybe I haven't been doing some of this stuff, or like, what are some of the questions that I should ask? Again, I always kind of joke, but if you're not looking at the companies that you support, their websites like once a month, like at the very least, look at the company websites, make sure they're not doing anything that you know violates a rule for one of these companies that just got in trouble. So, do they have any guarantees? Is it any sort of deceptive marketing? I would even like poke hold if it's a GLP company and they're doing ads and they're showing people that look too thin. Like that also could be problematic because in the FTC world, that's kind of like promoting certain things that shouldn't be promoted.
Yeah.
So I'm always saying, like, look at their website and you should be able to, from there, pose additional questions to the company to at least get you some sort of involvement. The second thing would be if you are not being paid out of the PC that you own, flag number two. We
Yeah.
all know that one of the biggest things for corporate practice of medicine is how the money flows. And people get really confused about this because they're, wait, hold on. I contracted with this MSO. The MSO is supposed to pay me because I'm this doctor. And it's like, no, go read your contract, go read the operating agreement. It very clearly indicates how the money has to flow, which basically is you get paid out of the PC that you own. You withhold that piece and you have some sort of system that kind of pays that. So that's like flag number 2 in terms of just making sure that you're in kind of the right structure. And the third is, do you know their clinical team? Do you actually know who is working, how they do their hiring practices? Because technically, as the PC owner, you are supposed to sign off
You're the
every
final
single clinical
signatory, right?
hire. And more often than not, do I talk to physicians who are, well, I got this new collaborator and I kind of dig into the paperwork and it's like, you're the PC owner. Did you interview this person? No. So, like, okay, there's not that again, it doesn't have to be a formal interview. It doesn't have to be something formalized, but you have to, and again, putting the shoe on the other foot, if you have a non-clinical company hiring clinical people, how do they know that they're hiring the best of the best? How
Yeah.
do they make sure that they have like all their ducks in a row? So that again is where you can kind of come in and support some of that to streamline and standardize those operations and really make sure that it's something that, you're comfortable with as the person who has to sign off on it. I don't know, Leo, those are the 3 things I always say. What about like in your world?
No, no. I always look as a company coming to me as a PC owner, definitely do they understand how the money flows, like you were saying? What is their compliance team, right? Do they worry about compliance? And I always like to pose it to them. What is their proposed kind of supervisory role that they have in mind for me as a PC owner? How are they going to keep me involved? So,
Yeah.
yeah, those are like my top three.
And if they don't want you involved, you force the involvement. So
Right.
I've worked with physicians before where, and it's interesting because again, like the physicians that understand what they've signed up for are like bulldogs. So I worked with this one company. I mean, of course, it was like a Medicare company. And the physician was like very adamant. They were a massive, massive practice. I think they did like remote patient monitoring in like tons of states. But the physician was like very on, like, no, I need to be looped in on all these things. Like he really kind of like drove it almost to the point where I think the company was caught a little off guard of like the level of involvement. But at the end of the day, it's the physician's name, it's the
Yeah.
physician's licenses, it's the physician's brand. I mean, it could really uproot a ton of things that you're doing. And so, again, just avoid certain scenarios like we're talking about today with like a Zealthy or a
Yeah.
Cerebral or done where there were probably multiple red flags, but at no point was there the appropriate like clinical gut check and the clinical approval, which in lieu of having such strict regulatory enforcement or oversight, that's CPOM. Like that's why I'm advocating for like my CPOM so hard is like you guys are the gut check.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to be ready for that role, right? And we talk about this all the time. A lot of these companies come to you as docs saying, hey, this is going to be totally passive. You're not going to have to do much of anything, maybe 1 or 2 hours a month. And for a lot of parts, yeah, there's not much you may have to do, but there is something you will have to do, right? It's not entirely passive. So that's another kind of yellow flag, I guess, a little cautionary thing. If a company goes to me and says, hey, I understand that this is going to be really passive for you. You're not going to have to do much of anything. I want to be involved with a company that does care that I am involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think at the end of the day, like the American dream is like, let's find passive revenue. Like, let's go. I
Right.
totally get it. And the interesting thing is, you can get it to a place where it's very streamlined, very organized. You get it down to where it's like your workflow, but it's an operational workflow. It has nothing to do with, is it a real passive thing? It has more to do with, have you taking the time to do kind of like all the onboarding, get everything completely set up to a place where you can actually sleep at night, feel comfortable and confident
Yeah.
that things are moving in a good spot.
No, this is a great conversation regarding this, right? Because time and time again, right? And you see it a lot. You see it a lot in like Indeed, Doximity, these companies are looking for PCR. And you're right. There's nothing stopping from somebody creating a company, and they're going to need the doctors to be there to, at least on paper on their end, so they could actually practice. And you're going to need to know what you're stepping into. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. I completely agree. I mean, prepare yourself, ask the right questions, get support, find somebody that actually understands operations. I think one thing I've seen in my experience, and if you have a lawyer who is not actually explaining the mechanics of how, like, what you're actually supposed to be doing in layman's terms, like, that's the piece that I find missing from so many people is there's not one way to comply with corporate practice of medicine. There's, like, lots of ways that you can operationalize it and do it, but you need to make sure that you actually understand what the heck you're supposed to do for that specific agreement and that
yeah.
specific client. So I would just say make sure that you actually understand what the role is and kind of like ideal state. You have no clue how many physicians I know are doing some sort of element of this wrong. And I would love to say, like, "Oh, if you do this thing wrong, this is the" I don't know, because, again, it's a place that is kind of uncharted territories. So you don't really know. We don't know until we know.
Yeah.
We don't just like, how we find out about the medical director thing, right? Like, there's not the sign that you're a medical director in Florida and you don't have that sign on the wall, like, Florida is going to take your license away as a medical director. Little things like that are just so nuanced, but we'll find them out as people get in trouble. That's the sad part.
Well, hey, if you have further questions, I know somebody who's great at ops, knows the rules. Her email address is Phoebe at telemedicinetalks.com. Drop her a line.
I'm maxed out, but happy to help if anybody has a question. But the biggest thing is just we inherently, and I think as we're seeing in all these different companies, you have companies that are very well funded, making millions and millions and millions of dollars, and somehow still making mistakes. In some instances, it's blatant fraud and it looks like fraud and it smells like fraud and it's so very obvious. 99% of the time, it's not.
Yeah.
The operations that are broken or something, again, that is a tech company that's just moving too fast and doesn't want to slow down and get an EHR.
You're
Or
right.
it's all those like little things. You can catch them because, again, compliance is a moving target and we're always moving into a compliant way or towards the compliant target, but you have to be moving in the right direction to get there.
Yeah. A lot of time they don't know what they don't know and they're just going along. And until somebody tells them or they get in trouble, right? That's the only time that they're aware that, hey, something's not totally right.
Yeah.
Hey, that's a good talk. I love how we went through the whole spectrum of that.
Well, I guess maybe we should end on a good note. It is absolutely possible to do this and like protect yourself
Oh,
and
absolutely.
make more money than you probably ever imagined if you take the time to do it right, understand how to do it, and actually dedicate the time to the company that it deserves through these different
Right.
arrangements.
And I think that's the best point of it all, right? You're right. Yeah, let this be a cautionary tale, not necessarily telling you to avoid it, but hey, just stay educated. So cool. Thanks, Phoebe. Always dropping dimes.
Yeah, I love being the flower on everybody's Friday, the sunshine, the rain.
Well, cool. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining on another episode of Telemedicine Talks. Love having you here. Again, drop us a line, Phoebe at telemedicinetalks.com or Leo at telemedicinetalks.com. We'd love to talk to you and actually love to have you on. Till next time.